I got to say, this past weekend, Thursday through Sunday, the U.S. Open, did you see did you watch any of it first and foremost?
I did, yes.
I
Yes.
love me.
Primarily the final two rounds, but
yeah, I love me major golf. It's like I don't really watch golf tournaments of the years, but the four majors and the Ryder Cup, I get all in on. And did you see that they started putting up, I can't remember what hole it was, but one of the holes had like two trees and this really tight, narrow opening, like right off the tee box get through. And it was about the size of a field goal post. And NBC, the broadcast, put up a fake field goal post
yes.
for viewers at home to watch as they're going. And I just got to say, talk about having a little fun. Golf is so stingy. It's so uptight. I thought that was really funny. There was a couple of viral tweets got it. My guy Barstool Big Cat, who I absolutely love, he was tweeting about it. And it just goes to show you too, like, if you're a network and you have an event that's a sporting event that is not football, if you can somehow get some football relation to it, it will help your event go viral.
No, I was going to say, it's
momentarily.
Really shows how NFL has literally infiltrated our culture in so many different ways. I mean, it is a part of everything. You can't help but not talk about it. That is an aspect to it all.
I loved it because it puts it into a little bit more perspective when you're watching golf and you see those trees. It's a tight window, but if you simply say it, lay it out and say like that's like a kicker having to hit a field goal from like 30 yards out. Like, oh, yeah, that's a small amount of space.
Yeah.
Obviously a golf ball is much smaller than a football, but you know what I mean? With how
but there's also the
is.
Variable change is a lot different with a golf ball too. So there is more, there's more room for error there as well. So
exactly.
Yeah, it is fascinating. Congrats to Matt Fitzpatrick, by the way. It's nice to see. I was honestly, as it got to the final day, I'm a big Rory guy. I'm a big McIlroy fan, and I've been rooting for him for years to get that next major.
Number 5. Yeah, get number 5.
Once it appeared that wasn't going to happen, especially on Sunday, I was like, I'd like to see one of the first-time major guys, win something. And, a 20-something, Morikawa, I'm a big fan of him, too.
Me, too. So I have,
but the future is here, man.
I have, Morikawa and Brooks Koepka, my number 1 and 2. I really root for them. I'll bet them every major to throw a couple bucks on them. That's what's so fun about golf, too. If you're looking a way to get into golf for the major tournaments, pick a golfer or two that you like. I had $5 on Zalatoris. I had him because he's another guy I really like. I usually take
from
about
the start. Did you get him from the start?
No, I had him from
day. I was gonna say
I had him from day 2, so it's still good odds. It was when he was -1 or -2. I think going into the weekend. So Morikawa, I always take about if Tiger's in the field, I always bet on Tiger. So Tiger's number 1, but then Morikawa, Koepka. I really like Will Zalatoris, and then I mean, obviously the Rory, Spieth, JT, those are guys if they win, I'm rooting for them. They're good stories. They're American, Rory not American, but JT and Spieth, American golfers. I like to see the guys who already have that, JT's now got 2, Spieth's got 3, Koepka's got 4 majors, Rory's got 4 majors. Those guys winning more is exciting to me because then it's it sets up now we got real rivalries. If you can get into 5 or more major wins, you can start being compared to, depending on how many tournaments you win overall, 5 and more starts getting you into okay, you're a top 12, top 10 golfer of all time. You can start putting in some rarefied air depending on the era you're doing it in and how many other wins it comes with it. And so I like the historical perspective of that. And I will say though, that's what's fun about betting golf is I think I had Morikawa and Koepka I bet from the beginning, and both of those decent odds. I think Morikawa was plus 1,400, so it was $5 to win, 160.
That's the bets to do, man.
Yeah, Brooks Koepka again. I think it was $5 to win 240. I think he was plus 3,300 or something like that. And those are the type of things, if you find a golfer you like, and you get them, bet him on a Wednesday, a couple, just, put $5 on a couple guys and see, where your horses then go through the weekend. I'll tell you what, Colin Morikawa, after his lead on Friday, in the final group on Saturday with that big lead he had, and after how great he played, I was sitting there, I was ready to start, writing checks with that money. And then Saturday killed me. So good job with the U.S. Open in Massachusetts, adding the football flair. And summer golf on Father's Day weekend, you just can't beat it.
No, definitely not. Summer major golf on Father's Day weekend. Big time stuff there. And I know we had a lot of golf to start the show, but you got to when it's the U.S. Open and when there's some cool stuff happening for sure. So I like it. By the way, just a side note, I think I've always had this in the back of my head, but I kind of just verbalized it this weekend. Is it just me, or does Rory look a ton like Paul McCartney? Like, he has that aura and just the general just look of.
I don't think I would have ever said it because of his hair. He's always had the short hair and the curly hair. But you're right. If you just kind of look like eyes, especially like eyes through here, I can see some Paul McCartney.
Yeah, and Rory's from Northern Ireland, and obviously Paul's from England, but still it struck me as something very similar there. So yeah, that was
absolutely
just an interesting note there as we go into our talk. So this is going to be a fun episode here. We're going to get into a couple quick notes that happened over the course of the past week, but then is going to come our top 10 defensive players of all time, something we've been really looking forward to for a while here. We've done a couple of these lists, quarterbacks, running backs. I think we still have to do wide receivers. So that could be an interesting one at some point in the future. But top 10 NFL defensive players of all time. And what we're going to do with this one is actually kind of bounce off of a list that CBS Sports provided on their top 10.
Yeah.
Give us a good reference point and some discussions there. So Mark and I each brought our lists here. We're going to compare them to CBS Sports. So that'll be pretty fun. Oh, yeah. That's I can definitely read all that.
Scribble. Only I can read it. That's the point.
Hey, that is the point. Yeah, no spoilers for sure. Before we get into that, quick notes. Minka Fitzpatrick inks himself a deal to become the highest paid safety in NFL history, over $18 million per year. And this one, a 4-year extension that's in about $73 million in new money.
Yeah.
On top of what he was already making. So a historic deal there, and smart one for the Steelers, given that we've got some guys, the Derwin James and others that are likely going to, break
reset
through.
The market.
Jesse Bates, they're going to reset that market. So smart on the Steelers to get this done sooner rather than later. And that is making, I think I tweeted this out right when the news broke, making that first rounder for Minka in 2019 just that much more of a just absolute steal. And what a great move that was by Kevin Colbert and company. Now they ink him. He is now, not a lifer, I wouldn't say, but certainly for the core of his prime, a Pittsburgh Steeler.
Yeah, Dan, I totally agree. I think I was excited to hear your thoughts on it, and I assumed it would be positive the way I felt about it too. Really, the great thing is it's really a good deal for the Steelers too, where it's basically like a 2-year giant guarantee deal, and then they can pretty much get out of it with need be and not have a lot of guaranteed money or money left on the books in that way. So it's really nice for that. But also, this is exactly the formula you want to do if you're an NFL team with a rookie quarterback or a second-year quarterback, because you're going to have to pay quarterbacks now we're seeing with the Kyler Murrays and all these other guys, like at that 4th year, if your guy's a hit, you got to start figuring out you're going to pay him and how to pay him and pay him now, because they're going to want that money now. So that first 2-3 years of your rookie deals, your rookie quarterback's contract, it's important to go out and spend in the other places. And that's, kind of, that Rams model with young Jared Goff of how to get to a Super Bowl, right? The Steelers have a ready now defense. Minka is a huge part of that. You pay him now, you keep him happy, and then you hope, hey, by the end of this contract, when you want to re-sign with us, we've been good to you, and you may not be at your physical peak anymore, but you want to keep you there, and then maybe you can get some hometown discounts and stuff like that when you got to pay the quarterback. And hopefully that's a good spot to be in if you're the Steelers, that you're paying Kenny Pickett big money. So great. I think, really smart movement by a smart franchise and a great player who got paid. It's a lot of money for a player that doesn't touch the ball, unless they're making a play. But he's such an important part of their defense. And if the Steelers are going to win in the next 2 years, it's going to be defense first.
Yeah, and that's kind of what they've made their, mold as being throughout their history, really, but especially, leaned into it in the Mike Tomlin era. So they went to their 3 Super Bowls largely because of their defense. You could say, their offense at the second Super Bowl was pretty solid too, but really it has been that. And so, yeah, I was happy with the move. I just want to say real quickly, as kind of a response to Colin Cowherd, we're both big fans of him. You maybe a little bit more so than I, but I try and watch and listen to him as often as I can because I like that he keeps it real and he's, usually pretty authentic with his opinions and he doesn't, he does his own thing, and I like that. But
yeah,
I will say, I think he missed the mark on this one because he kind of used this as an opportunity to say about how Pittsburgh basically, is spending the money in the wrong places and how you got to spend on, guys that actually, translate to wins. And look, they haven't won in a while, and I get that. But to use the point that a lot of people are using about how I think they're like 31st in the league in terms of spending on offense. Well, yeah, that's what happens when your average age of your offensive starter is 24, 25 years old.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's really, they're all on rookie deals. If anything, that's smart business to have a lot of early draft picks invested in your offense and they're up and coming. So, I mean, that's just the nature of what happens. And they really spent a lot in the offseason too. So I just want to put that out there. I think that this signing is something that they needed to do. They spent a first rounder to get him. He's been elite. And you try and keep guys that are in house instead of having to go outside and pay guys all the time. So
absolutely, especially when they're one of the elite at your position. I agree. Yeah. I saw Cowherd's take on as well, and I normally think that Cowherd, he does a really good job of looking at the other side of it. I never would have thought that way because again, we just stated our opinions like, hey, my instant reaction to this was that's what you do when you have a rookie quarterback. You spend on your other positions of need and the guys that you need to pay because you have a rookie quarterback. I think it's a valid point saying like, listen, I think his larger point is always now it's an offensive league and you want to spend on offense and you got to surround your young quarterback. But it's not like the Steelers don't have talent on offense around Kenny. You're right there. It's just younger and right now it's inexpensive.
Yeah. I mean, and they probably will extend Deontay Johnson pretty soon. Yeah. And so they'll have 4 very young wide receivers, one proven to be a number 1.
Yeah,
in the league. They got a young tight end that they just got last year, and they revamped the offensive line. I mean, there's not much more they could do unless they, went out and poached Patrick Mahomes from the Chiefs or something like that. Yeah. Like I don't know what you want them to do. They're doing what they can. It's not going to be a great year, I don't think, but yeah, this is how it works. Speaking of quarterbacks and movement there, Baker Mayfield news, started to heat up a little bit. I wouldn't say it was scorching hot, but some reports saying that the Panthers still are very much in the sweepstakes and in the, possible discussions of acquiring Baker Mayfield. And, yes, that's going to apply some pressure on Sam Darnold. They've been talking him up throughout mini camps so far in OTAs, how good he looks, how prepped he is. But, deep down that they understand kind of what's at stake with this roster and what they need to do. And so, I've said from the get-go that Baker, that would be a smart move for them. I don't think they'd have to pay the farm to get a guy like him. And he's an instant upgrade and, a guy that's not going to turn the ball over a ton. And that's really what this offense needs is just some stability and not a bunch of just craziness thrown out there. So, it makes sense. It's interesting that the reports are coming out now in camp again after it seemed like everything was squashed. But that's what happens as markets tend to cool. Other teams try and pounce when the opportunity strikes.
It's funny. I think you used an interesting word that you paid the farm, but it's like that's exactly what the Panthers don't want to do. They don't want to pay money for Baker Mayfield. They're willing to give up a 6th-round pick or whatever, maybe a player. They just don't want to eat that salary because they're eating the Darnold salary, and I think they're still paying Teddy Bridgewater, if I'm not mistaken. So they have a lot of money tied up in the quarterback room, and Baker's owed a lot of money right now. It's his 5th-year option. You know what I mean? It's all guaranteed money. And so it's a kind of a stalemate. the only real landing spot for Baker to start right away, guaranteed, is Carolina, because Carolina seems like the only one of these teams in that bottom 5 or 6 range that is trying to actively win and not go like toilet. I also think Carolina is the only team that is, I think they saw what this year's draft looked like, and I think they're scared of looking around at the draft. I think they're a team that's looking, going, man, we thought this, whether it's Malik Willis, whoever it was, and you get the tape, you get him in-house, and you start to realize we just need someone in this building who's capable of playing quarterback at a high level. And like we said all along down in the NFC South, second place is wide open. I mean, Jameis Winston and the Saints should feel good about getting second in that division. But if Carolina brings in Baker with the young pieces they have around him, and if McCaffrey has a great, healthy year, well, there's no reason why Carolina couldn't be battling for second or be second in that division. So, it's interesting. I will say I think it's all about the money. And if you're the Browns, you got to get Baker Mayfield out of the house. And I do think if you're the Browns, the best thing you can do, Dan, if things don't go well in as far as Deshaun Watson playing this year, which to me it looks like it's more and more likely like he's not going to be playing this year, the best thing you could do is have the cheapest option available at quarterback. I mean, the absolute cheapest option available. And Baker's not that. And so if you go cheapest option available, remember the Browns technically are only paying Deshaun Watson $1 million in salary this year. They've already given him a ton of money. It's all guarantees or whatever, signing bonuses.
Signing bonus and all
but
that.
That's going to be really, really important to them to have, is to find someone out there in the market really, really affordable. And maybe young. I mean, talk about, they could make a move and bring in someone really young. I don't know. We haven't thought about a list of what guys they could do.
Maybe like a Gardner Minshew might be
maybe, go like get aggressive for something like that, where they have a win now team who they need that younger veteran player who they feel like they can, come in and maybe even be Deshaun's backup in the future. You know what I mean? It sucks that Huntley and the Ravens is your own division, but he'd be a guy, maybe Tyrod Taylor.
Oh yeah, he would for sure.
You know what I mean? So it's going to be really interesting. I still think Baker will be moved eventually, especially if the Browns, this story leaked from SI, basically and the Browns, this is the Browns putting it out there to the whole NFL. We'll go halvesies. We're getting to the point now. We'll go halvesies on Baker. And I think the phone calls will now start, heating up a little bit now that they've sent that message out there.
Yeah, I mean, look, teams are going to want to get him in before training camp.
ASAP.
If this is going to happen, you got to get him in there and get started, because then you're dealing with a lot of last-minute stuff, and that's not how you want to begin your season. So I agree. I think if we're going to hear news, we should be hearing it sooner rather than later on the Baker Mayfield front. That concludes our news and notes from the league over this past week. And so now we can get into the nitty-gritty and the fun stuff here with the top 10 defensive players of all time. Now, this was an interesting list, and for those of you watching on YouTube, we'll have the list pop up here for your reference for a little bit here. So this is courtesy of our friends over at CBS Sports, and this is according to Jeff Kerr there at CBS. He put his top 10 defensive players of all time in the ranking in that order. And so we'll read this off, and then we can go 10 through 1, I'm guessing, Mark. And kind of discuss where we have our guys. So number 10 for Jeff Kerr at CBS Sports is Ronnie Lott, followed by number 9, Rod Woodson. So we're going back-to-back defensive backs there to start the back end of this list. Number 8, Mr. Sack himself, Bruce Smith. Then Dick Buckus, going old school and staying there with Deacon Jones at number 6. Followed by number 5, the only active player, Aaron Donald there at number 5 all time. Number 4, Deion Sanders. 3, Ray Lewis. 2, Lawrence Taylor. And 1, Reggie White. So, with that, I'll toss to you, Mark, for your number 10 and see what it looks like. Is it similar?
Let me just start by saying I think his list overall has a lot of the right players on it. I'm going to be a little nitpicky on where those players land. I'll start number 10. I actually have Woodson at 10. And Rod Woodson is one of those really, really special players who I think could still be so effective in today's NFL. Sometimes you see guys who started their career 80s, and then through the 90s and early 2000s, like a Rod Woodson, or even older, the Ronnie Lotts. You go back even further and further, and you say to yourself, well, they couldn't play in today's NFL because they were just big hit guys. Rod Woodson was way more than just big hit guy, right? His coverage skills, leadership abilities, ball hawk, 71 interceptions, 6-time All-Pro. And you know what? He was a guy that, found ways to stay relevant, made that Ravens team, and won that Super Bowl then at the end of his career. And I think, you've heard the stories and everything. He deserves just a ton of credit too for Ray Lewis is kind of birthed out of him. You know what I mean? In that sense of Ray always talked about how once you got Rod into the fold, that's when it's like, oh, I understand how to be a veteran, how to lead as well. Rod Woodson, I think, deserves a ton of credit for that. I think he's one of the all-time greats and deservedly in the top 10. And I have him at number 10, just barely making this list. And really, it's as we'll see as we get on, it's not because I don't like Rod Woodson a ton, but I just think there's some stats and some other things that just like the way that I like defensive players to play. There's a couple guys on this list that are just hard for me to put Rod Woodson ahead of, but all-time great player.
This was a really hard list to put together, actually. I struggled, and we'll talk about our honorable mentions at the end here. There were about four. I put four guys that were so close to getting inside the top 10, and it was super hard. But that's what you get when you're talking about top 10 at any unit or position. There's so few to go around when you're talking about top 10 there. They gotta edge them out. 10 for me is Ronnie Lott, and I know that's going to be low for some people, and I think he phenomenal. Ronnie Lott's incredible. 14 seasons in the NFL, and you want to talk about the guy who established a safety being laying the thunder. That was Ronnie Lott, a great against the run. He had nearly 1,200 tackles in his career and 63 picks to go along with it in those 14 seasons, 10 Pro Bowls, 6 first-team All-Pros. So some comparable things there to Woodson in terms of the numbers and the accolades.
Yeah.
Ronnie Law really did transcend the statistical category, though. He was a guy who, a part of those great 49ers defenses that really set the tone in terms of manning the entire secondary, was a guy that, took away an entire half of the field, and just loved his physicality. That's, to me, what catapults him into this, is that he was not just a DB who could cover. He was a guy that absolutely got into the thick of it and made tackles in an era where running backs were big and thick and hard to bring down. He was a guy that never shied away from that. So, nothing but good things to say about Ronnie Lott. I know he comes a little bit low on what I would think some people would presume, but that's where I have him, and that's where CBS Sports has him too. So that's the one I think I agree on in the entire list. As we mentioned, we're going to have some separations here in terms of who's on it and where they fall, but I agree with them at number 10, Ronnie Lott.
Yeah, I got to be honest. I will get to Ronnie Lott soon here. I disagree. I think he should be higher than Rod Woodson. I'll go to my number 9. 9 on CBS Sports is Rod Woodson. My number 9 is Deakin Jones. I have him a little bit lower. And listen, Deakin Jones is one of those guys, obviously did not see him play. Physical freak. You hear all the stats, like, he played in an era, remember, before sacks counted, and there's estimates that he would be and should be the all-time sack leader if you counted sacks during his era. I mean, he is one of those players that multiple modern generation players still refer to as one of the all-time greats. So he's going to make my list in honor of that, and just some the footage and the YouTube videos and the stats they do have on him. It's all adds up to me that he feels like he should be a top 10 player. And, when you do these top 10 lists, I do think it's important to always have some representation from guys of, way bygone eras, and, here's a guy that was drafted, was born in 1938. So you're talking about a guy who played in the 60s mainly. And so I think it's important to honor those generations. And Deacon is probably the one defensive lineman that both from that era of, the kind of black and white NFL pre-Super Bowl really era that, belongs in this still could translate top 10 defensive player of all time. But I have him lower. I'll put him at 9 because, again, I don't have the depth of knowledge to go on a giant Deacon Jones rant, but I know smart enough with the respect to the game and all the lists you see out there. I believe everyone else, and I believe my eyes from the YouTube clips, that he belongs in that list.
Oh yeah, he was a revolutionary, for that time. I think he was 6'5", 280, just like a massive guy, especially for that era. So what's really cool is Pro Football Reference. They did this project where they went back and tried to tally sacks based on all the archive footage they were able to find, and so they have a fairly accurate statistical category now for a lot of players from that era. However, the NFL won't recognize it, which is silly to me because Pro Football Reference are a great source for all of these things, and they got their hands on every game. So it's just the NFL just wants to keep the cutoff where it is so that it's not messy. But they have Deacon Jones listed as getting 22 sacks 2 different times in his career.
Wow.
And actually he had 20 plus sacks in 3 seasons, which is just wild. And then 19 in another, 15 in another. So they have him listed as 173 and a half total sacks in his career, which is wild. And he played 14 seasons too, which
back then especially.
Yeah. And he was only 27 sacks away from Bruce Smith's, record. And Bruce Smith played nearly 20 years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that tells you all you need to know about Deacon Jones. And obviously he was the guy that engineered the head slap. That was the big thing, is that he would disorient an offensive tackle right out of the gate with the big slap to the side of the helmet and just completely neutralize them. Just a physical freak. And I had him at number 9 as well. So I agree with you there. We are in violent agreement in terms of his placing there. He led the league in sacks 5 times. And like we mentioned, just a physical force and a guy who really was the first to, I wouldn't say coin the term sack, but make it a thing, we're taking note because this guy is in the backfield way too often.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Deacon Jones, definitely. Got to go with the historic one there. Number 9, and we'll go back to reference CBS's list here. They have, number 8, is they have Bruce Smith there. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Who you got?
It's maybe the first big upset. I don't have Bruce Smith on my list. Bruce Smith is one of those guys that you honor. I mean, the stats aren't everything, right? That's what you got to say. Stats aren't everything. And Bruce is terrific, absolutely terrific, and he's deserved. Gets all the credit in the world. He doesn't make my list. I go number 8. I go Ronnie Lott. Ronnie Lott, was a part of all of those Super Bowl wins. And I think that's one of the things that separates Ronnie Lott from me and why he gets a nod ahead of a Rod Woodson, is the Super Bowl wins. Ronnie Lott played the game at a level, an almost Paul Bunyan-like status. You know what I mean? You hear the stories of his finger having to get amputated. He absolutely was feared by players. I mean, people still talk about him like he was, like God. I mean, you avoided him at all costs. Is terrifying. 63 interceptions, 8-time All-Pro. It's that type of guy. I think a 10-time Pro Bowler. You put on the footage of Ronnie Lott and you say to yourself, that is the epitome of what the NFL was when people talk about the NFL it's not like it used to be anymore. And you know what? Maybe Ronnie Lott would not have been as successful in the modern NFL as he was in the time that he played. But he played in an era where the rules let him do what he did, and he was brilliant at taking advantage of everything that the NFL let him do. And, when you talk Super Bowls with the 49ers, you always talk about Montana and Rice and the Clark catch. But those defenses, because of Ronnie Lott, were really, really, really special. And not many guys from those Niners defenses, those Niners teams have a good amount of Hall of Famers. Ronnie Lott is the elite of the elite on that defensive side of the ball of one of the biggest dynasties in NFL history. And I think the winning helps bump Ronnie Lott up a little bit more. And also just the nostalgia for the kind of, like I said to start, the Paul Bunyan-esque way that Ronnie Lott in the play that, the way he played the game is described.
Yeah, very true. And, we talked about him earlier with me having him there at number 10, but it is the different mold, but it's like before there was Brian Dawkins, there was Ronnie Lott. Like he really paved the way for a lot of guys who took after that. And I mean, you could put Steve Atwater in a very similar vein as well, though they were like the same era. But yeah, just very impactful and terrified wide receivers. For number 8, right. I have Rod Woodson because to me, I put him ahead of Ronnie Lott in terms of the DBs because of a few different things. Longevity, for one. He played 17 seasons in the league. Had 6 first-team All-Pros, 11 Pro Bowls, so very comparable there in terms of the accolades. But he's third all-time in the interceptions with 71. And it was his ability to house a play at any moment. 13 touchdowns for him. That's more than Ed Reed, which is crazy to think about because, like, all I feel like I know about Ed Reed is that he's in the end zone all the time.
Yeah, right.
But Rod Woodson was that guy that just pick six all day. And the fact that he brought versatility to the position where he could play corner or he could play safety, he did both. And that's an underrated skill. I mean, they're so wildly different positions. And we've seen that, recently with Minka Fitzpatrick, how he wasn't being used properly in Miami at corner. They put him at free safety. He absolutely goes off and, has all pro seasons. So Rod Woodson was the guy that was super versatile, won a defensive player of the year. It's something, Ronnie Lott never won. And obviously he was a return man as well, but that doesn't count towards defensive player. But I just think his versatility on defense is what made him that much more valuable, and how his impact on the game maybe was felt a little bit more based on some guys trying to do it all. And obviously the effect he had in game in terms of being able to score at any moment was huge. The numbers speak for themselves, but his longevity and versatility to me elevated him to number 8 here on the list.
No, I mean, listen, I think it's, again, two sides of the coin. When you're talking about 8 and 10, it's a little bit more of a preference. And Steelers guy, you got to put that out there. But either way, we digress.
Just wait.
Oh, I bet.
All right. So number 7 we got here on their CBS list, according to Jeff Kerr, is Dick Buckus. Coming in at number 7, so we go from my pick of the Steelers to a Chicago Bear, your beloved Chicago Bears. We've both seen plenty of footage of Dick Buckus highlights because they're hilarious. Because you hear the like just the grunt and the growl,
he's like a cartoon,
barking.
Yeah. Cartoon.
Yeah, he really was, and just a massive human being, just so big and moved so fast. They have him at number 7. Do you agree, or you got Dick Buckus number 1 all the time?
No, he's not number 1 all time, but he's not number 7. Number 7, okay. I actually go J.J. Watt. So this may be the first kind of controversial, but listen, J.J. Watt is a guy that I think, Aaron Donald's rise here in the last 5 years has overshadowed the fact that a decade ago, J.J. Watt was Aaron Donald. I mean, he physically could dominate in any era. Injuries have hurt him, certainly the longevity, but as far as like a 5-year span of dominance, I don't know if there's anyone who touches J.J. Watt, especially because he became an offensive weapon as well to play tight. They moved him on the offense. But when you win 3 defensive player of the years 3 times, 2012, 2014, 2015, 5-time first team All-Pro, a second team All-Pro as well, 5-time Pro Bowler, led the league in sacks 2 different times. He's part of the All-Decades team in 2010. Now, listen, his sack numbers are not up there with the elite of the elite all-time great. 102 sacks. And actually, it's funny. It puts him with the same one ahead of only Robert Quinn, who's on the Bears. And no one thinks of Robert Quinn as an all-time player. But again, I think that just tells a little bit of why JJ was on the trajectory to be a top 5 guy of all time. But the injuries prevented JJ from getting to being a top 5 all time. He will go down, in my opinion, as a top 10. If you want to have him just outside the top 10, again, I'm not going to stand on a hill and die on it for JJ Watt. If people are out here going, I'm loony for it, I lived through and watched every snap of JJ Watt's dominance. And there was no one, even Aaron Donald, at times it was as dominant as JJ when he was on in that 5-year span. From being drafted to 2015. And, in the 2016 on, injuries has really killed him and is hurt the last part of his guaranteed first ballot Hall of Fame career. So I put JJ at 7. I think he's deserving of it. And I don't think his career is necessarily over. I think he's a guy that can still find a way in the next 2 years to get into the 120s in sacks. And all of a sudden that moves him into that top, 30, top 25 all-time sack leaders. Puts him a little bit more where his, in the company that he should be in at that point as far as like all-time greatness. And so I hope he ends his career in these last, next year, 2 years, 3 years, maybe playing healthy, getting sacks, adding stat padding a little bit. I don't think it'll ever help him get top 5 for me, but I think he belongs on this list. I'll put him at 7.
Fair enough. Yeah, I will talk about JJ Watt as we get throughout the rest of the show. But and look, there's a case to be made. A 3-time defensive player of the year. That's only happened 3 times in the history of the NFL.
Yeah.
Obviously, the guys had a massive impact on the league, and its history already is in the history books for that. So those are important things. It's just about how you weigh the importance of these things. It's another part I agree on the list. I do have Buckus at 7.
No.
And, part of what didn't have Buckus higher for me is the unfortunate lack of overall, career longevity. I mean, he did 9 seasons, and now they were 9 dominant seasons. Guy was incredible. Made a Pro Bowl the first 8 years of his career. And that was a time when Pro Bowls were legit. They
meant something.
They meant a lot.
They were same as all pro back then.
Correct. Yeah. And he was a 5-time first team all pro as well. Obviously was the guy that you talked about when you talked about middle linebacker and what it meant to plug gaps and be a force behind the line of scrimmage. And, something I think that does get lost in the shuffle. Obviously we never watched him live, but his ability to be sideline to sideline, pretty underrated. He was way more athletic, I think, than people even discuss because of his size and how big he was, and just think of him mashing into the line. But that guy was running people down all day. I mean, the hustle was there. So no question, he's a top 10 defensive player of all time for me, Dick Buckus. But I think overall, because of that lack of longevity, is the only knock I had for him in terms of some of the other guys that we have up this list. They just have more. So that's what knocked him there for me. But you can absolutely make the argument of him being a top 5 guy.
Yeah. You know what? I'll make my argument for Dick later, but I mean, you're absolutely right. He deserves to be a top 10 all time. I think a little higher, but we'll get to it.
Yeah. And it's you can't, are these guys that you can't tell the history of the league without, that's what we think is a decent barometer for a lot of these. There's no question you can't tell the history of the NFL without Dick Buckus. So 6, they have Deacon Jones. Now we already talked about that, number 9 for us. So nothing to go over there with Deacon, but who do you have at 6? Because I am interested to see, maybe this is where we're going to see some diversions and some big swings or something like that. So,
well, I'm actually going Aaron Donald at 6. So I have him just ahead of JJ Watt. Again, 3-time defensive player of the year, 7-time first team all pro, 8-time Pro Bowler. The Super Bowl this year, I certainly think helps as well. He was such a part of it and such a dominant force. I think that why Aaron Donald will get the edge over JJ historically is his longevity. I mean, Aaron's health has been a huge factor. I think Aaron Donald is a special kind of player who, again, would be dominant in any era of football. I think Aaron Donald will have a very nice last couple years of his career. And I think Aaron Donald would be smart to hang it up a little bit early and leave a little on the table. He'll be the defensive version.
Legend.
He could be the defensive version of Barry Sanders, especially if he had actually retired this year. But I think he has a chance, depending on how the next 2 to 3 years of his career go with the Rams. I think definitely 2 years, it looks like, with that big guarantee and this way he signed that contract. If they win another Super Bowl, if he, gets another big sack season, could be in the top, voting, another All-Pro. You're talking about maybe he could move up a spot on my list, in my opinion, especially the way he does it from the defensive tackle position. In the modern NFL, when defensive tackles are being so muted in the sense of you can't just be the big Keith Trailers anymore. You know what I mean? I think back to the Bears of 2001 with Traylor in Washington. Or Vince Wilfork.
Or Raji,
Yeah, defensive tackles are 300-pound bowling balls who you have got to take on 2 blockers. Aaron Donald's got to take on 2 blockers, but he's got to get to the quarterback because it's a passing league. And he's so good at it. And he's built so uniquely. And sometimes it's just simple as that. You see a guy who's an absolute physical freak, and you go, that guy's one of the greatest of all time. And he's taken that physical freak status and he's actually applied it to wins, statistics, and usage. Because sometimes you see physical freak guys and they don't pan out. The Jamarcus Russells of the world. And you're like, you wasted all of that. So Aaron Donald deserves all the credit in the world. He keeps his body right. There's no reason why he shouldn't be in competition again for another Defensive Player of the Year award going into the start of this year. And that just says something for a guy who has been so good since he entered the league 9 years ago now. So Aaron Donald belongs, I think, maybe in the top 5 when it's all said and done. Right now, because his career's not over, I'll keep him at 6.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, just the fact that we're watching right now a top 10 offensive or defensive player of all time and offensive player of all time, and Tom Brady. We've had this has been quite an era the last about 15 years or so of some dominant players, and Aaron Donald certainly on that list, and just 8 short seasons so far. So we'll see how much left he has in the tank. For me, I do have Bruce Smith. That Bruce Smith is on this list, and to me, he has to be because he has 200 sacks. I totally get that stats aren't everything, and a lot of his sacks may not have been indicative of his dominance, but at a certain point, the stat gets ridiculous, and you're like, clearly this guy was impacting. We're talking about also an era where, passing was blooming into this, huge thing. You were talking about like the efficiency and the Aikmans and the Youngs and getting the ball out quicker and, doing a lot of unique things. And then you had the Favres who can, athletic and make plays outside, John Elway. So Bruce Smith, to me, to get the sacks and to be as dominant as he was, not to mention a huge piece of Super Bowl runs in Buffalo.
Yeah.
8-time first team All-Pro, 11 Pro Bowls, like a lot of these, and to do it over 19 NFL seasons. The guy was built differently. He's a different mold. You're not going to find many defensive players, especially linemen, that last 19 seasons in the NFL. I just think the motor's there. And I totally get the point where it's like, does he come to mind when you instantly think of like legends? No, he doesn't. But I also think that's just a product of, maybe he's just been a little bit underrated despite his status and his Hall of Fame credentials.
Valid.
So to me, he's not top 5, and I could be persuaded to move him down a couple notches, but I do think he has to be all 10 or top 10, because sack and how important of a category that is, and it's been around for a long enough time now. I just think for him to have 200, that's crazy, man. Like even if it was just 10 sacks a year for 19 seasons, that's remarkable, or 11. to average that over that long, impressive.
He's the hardest omission for me, and we're at the point of the list now where everyone else on the list is on my list. That's there's no other wild cards that weren't on the CBS list because you're getting the elite of the elite, and I think we got most of it right. I basically had to find a spot for J.J. Watt, and I took Bruce Smith off it, and that was was a swap for me, and I think it's because there is I go back to. For me, there was a 5-year stretch where no one could touch J.J. Watt. And Bruce Smith, as great as he was, it's always been more. He's the Frank Gore. I mean, he is the Frank Gore of defensive linemen for running backs. And now I get it. He was a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. He had a really good, 1990, 96, 8-time first-team All-Pro. Hard to leave off, but I wanted to get the multiple defensive backs in their representation. So it just kind of fell to Bruce Smith's the one out. And again, I go Deacon Jones over him because of the historical importance of having someone from that type of era. So it's tough to make the list. I think J.J. Watt, because I saw it with my own eyes, and at the peak of his peak was higher than the peak of Bruce Smith's peak. And so it's but I think that's the biggest argument and the biggest disagreement we'll have on this list. You know what I mean?
Maybe we'll see. We'll get to number 5 here, and I'll let you know. I'll see what you think. Okay. So number 5 for them is Aaron Donald. We've already discussed him. But for me, number 5, and it's the big omission from this list that I think is fairly glaring in my opinion. Yeah.
Jack Lambert.
It is not not Jack Lambert. Joe Green. It's Joe Green.
Mean Joe Green. Yeah.
Some guy, and this is the one that the stats don't back it up.
Yeah.
Because he didn't blow you away. He had 77 and a half sacks in his career over 13 seasons. Somehow they don't have him listed as making a Pro Bowl in one of his first team All-Pro years. So I'm trying to figure that one out.
Yeah, what happened there?
So he at least made 10 straight Pro Bowls to start his career, again in a era where that mattered. 4-time first team All-Pro on a defensive line that was named the Steel Curtain, on a defense that was legendary, that had 12 Hall of Famers come through there. And when you think of the 70s defenses, it's Mean Joe Green that comes to mind first. You're absolutely right. The guy. And we're talking amongst the Jack Lamberts, amongst the Mel Blunts. He's the dude, and Joe Green was the guy. So that's what I mean. To me, it's more about the story of the NFL and some guy that was so well revered and well respected throughout the league as a dominant run stuffer. There was no one like him up to that point, really, because you had the Deacon Jones who were the pass rushers off the edge, but Mean Joe was the interior guy who was a huge body who could also rush the passer, but really got it done in the trenches, took on double teams routinely, and set the tone for 4 championship teams, and was the guiding force of that legendary defense. So to me, he's got to be. To me, he's a top 5 guy.
You're not getting much argument from me in the sense that I think he's one of my first off the list, and again, because he falls into that Paul Bunyan stature as well. And you talk about the history of the league, a guy that you just, whenever you talk about eras or generations, his name will always be brought up because of what he meant, and he became larger than life for sure. I think for me personally,
and he's a Coca-Cola fan over Pepsi. He's actually not. He actually threw it up during the takes. I was reading a story about that. He had to have a spit bucket because he hated soda, and the carbonation made him constantly want to throw up. So yeah, that was just a funny.
That's hilarious. I mean, drinking if you had to drink a lot,
he had to chug it.
Yeah, if you do, that's that. I mean, I get it.
Yeah,
it makes him even more of a legend. You know what? For me, he just doesn't. The stats weren't there, and my thought was, I came down to it was like, if I'm not going to put Bruce Smith on, I can't then put Mean Joe on because I don't know how to make that argument. Besides the fact that I kind of like Mean Joe more and the era and so that's kind of where I got. And I think maybe if I look back on my list, I am a little frustrated myself in the sense that I feel like I had to get representation from multiple position groups a little bit more.
Yeah.
And that's what's
and
hard
I understand
because,
that.
it is hard because you have defensive backs. A guy who's about to be coming up on my list does not nearly have the stats as a Bruce Smith or whatever, but the impact on the game, it's just, it's hard. So there's always going to be big names left off. Mean Joe is certainly one. It's hard for me to have left him off. I'm not going to fight you on the fact that Mean Joe being a top 5, you make a great case for it. And I think it's a worthwhile argument.
Yeah, he's just a legend.
Number 5 for me is someone that, this may seem controversial because he's not the highest at his position on my list. And that's Ray Lewis. I have Ray Lewis at 5. And Ray Lewis is a guy that I'll always struggle with. Listen, we can lead off the Ray stats, and they are insane. He's the all-time leader in tackles, 1,568. He played for what? 14,
20,000 years.
Yeah. He almost played for 16-something seasons. At that position is just incredible. He's a 10-time All-Pro, 13-time Pro Bowler, 2-time Super Bowl champion, 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. Many people argue he should be the number 1 at his position, best linebacker of all time. I have him as the 3rd best linebacker of all time. I think Ray was a guy that longevity, he has a little bit of Bruce Smith in the sense that he was able to play at a high level for a long time, and he deserves credit for that. But when you stack up what he accomplished in that much time, it really doesn't blow you away in the sense that, like, I think there was his contemporaries too at times were better than him, and for periods of stretches. Like Brian Urlacher hurts Ray Lewis's case, in my opinion, to be like all-time great. Because you put Brian's stats next to Ray's. Brian only played for 12 years. I mean, he played a full 4 seasons of Ray Lewis prime seasons. They both ended in 2012. Ray Lewis started in 96, 4 years for Urlacher entered the league. So young, athletic prime Ray Lewis only had a 4-year head start on Brian. And if you track the numbers out, Brian would be basically matching him in all of the statistical categories. So and there was, and Urlacher had a Defensive Player of the Year in the heart of Ray Lewis's prime. He had, Urlacher had, I think in my point in time, bigger signature moments at times in playoff runs. I mean, Ray was great with those 2 great defenses, but can you think of the signature like Ray Lewis, like play or moment? There's not many that come to mind. He packed up a ton of stats, all that stuff. And so personally, I just am not as big of a Ray Lewis guy. The showmanship, the dancing, obviously the off the field stuff. I don't need to get into it. We're talking about on the field stuff. But I've just never been as big of a Ray Lewis fan. He was great, and he was able to be smart enough to transition his career. And because Ray was good at the microphone, I think it forced a lot of the Peyton Manning versus Ray Lewis, Tom Brady versus Ray Lewis. Brian Urlacher never went to the microphone. He's a very quiet player. And because that, you had to wait for quarterbacks to say, man, I gotta play against Brian Urlacher today. You'd hear Aaron say it. You'd hear Favre say it. You know what I mean? You'd hear great NFC quarterbacks talk about those matchups, but it was always Tom and Peyton versus Ray. And Ray, he used the media, I think, to that advantage as well. Listen, his stats are incredible. I'm putting him at 5, so I'm not slighting him too hard. But as far as greatness of playing the position, I think there are 2 guys at linebacker who deserve to be ranked above Ray. And I have no shame in putting 3 linebackers in the top 5 of the best defensive players of all time, because I think linebacker is the most important defensive position. They're quarterbacks of the defense, and they have the ability to get sacks, interceptions, and tackles all at a high rate. So statistically, you see their impact in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's 17 seasons in the league, almost as long as his Hall of Fame speech. So, I mean, that's pretty impressive.
He should be knocked because of that. That was embarrassing.
Really should.
Peyton Manning, a guy I could listen to for an hour give a speech, had to give a 10-minute speech because of Ray Lewis. So bleep you, Ray.
Yeah. Ruined it for the rest of us. All right. Number 4 on the list. All right.
Wait, who was
Deion Sanders comes in as Jeff Kerr. What's that?
Never mind. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Deion Sanders comes in at number 4 from Jeff Kerr's list at CBS Sports. Number 4 for me is Aaron Donald. And to me, he cracks the top 5 because of the sheer dominance in a short span of time. 8 straight Pro Bowls to start his career, 7 first-team All-Pros, and he's still in the prime of his career, you feel. Like if he does go out, like you were saying, like Barry was in the prime of his career when he left. If Aaron Donald left next season, like he would still be in his prime. Just an incredible run, and 3-time Defensive Player of the Year in that span as well. Just almost won it again this past season. There's definitely not out of the realm of question that by the time he ends his career, he could have 4 or 5 of those Defensive Player of the Years. Just unfathomable stuff. He is Reggie White of the modern era.
He is.
And, it's not even, I don't even need to put the caveat of like, I'm not saying he's like Reggie. No, he's like Reggie White. Like he's that White. Good. So 98 sacks for him so far. Just a super dominant player. I know you had him just outside the top 5. We're pretty close. But this is a guy that keeps rising right now. It's going to be hard to get to number 1, but he is just so dominant. There's not much more to say about the guy. We've all watched him. We all know what he brings to the table.
I will say he has a chance to get to number 1. He really does. I mean, he's got 2 years. He's got 2 years guaranteed with the Rams. And then that 3rd year he can pick up depending if he wants it. So let's say he does 3 more seasons. If they win another Super Bowl in that 3 seasons, if he wins another Defensive Player of the Year and he gets to 120 plus sacks from the defensive line position, I think there's a legitimate argument. He would move into probably the top 3 for me. I think there's no way you could not. And I think there's a legitimate argument then he's the only one you can put in that argument of say like it's like Michael and LeBron. Like you could argue that it's a top 2, a top 3, and not a lot of other people are close then. Like I said, I have no qualms with that because the only reason I have him at 6 and not in the top 5 is I just want to see where it ends. I want to see where it ends. And maybe that's silly that I should just go off of what he's already done, but I'll still give Ray a little bit of a nod ahead, Aaron. All right, number 4 for me is prime time, Deion Sanders. So Deion, I think, is controversial because, again, Deion is one of those he's one of those where you just don't have necessarily all the stats that you want, right? You don't have the flash stats, but Deion, again, is a larger than life character. Talk about telling the story of the NFL. Deion also is the type of guy that I think his impact at returning the football has to be measured, and that his ability to score when he got the ball in his hands is unlike anything we'd seen in the NFL history besides Devin Hester. But Devin is not a defensive player. Devin's just a returner, really. More of an offensive player, actually, even though he's drafted as a defensive player. So I don't think I have to make too much of a case for it. I think Deion, when you talk about greatest defensive players of all time, I think Deion being in the top 5 makes sense to me. Everything lines up. His stats are good. He's a Hall of Famer. He impacted winning. He did things that we hadn't seen done at a level that he did them at. And he did them with a flash and a flair that was appropriate for the way he helped win. He wasn't like a locker room cancer. You never heard those stories with Deion. And unlike Ray, who he used like the media and all that stuff in a way that I felt was like, oh, good God, like Ray, enough already. You're like building this lore. Deion, his use of
more natural with Deion
is way more natural, and his use of the off the field, I think it makes an impact for how good he was on the field. There were times that, and I've seen highlight footages of like Deion didn't even just lock people down. I mean, like his side of the field, you couldn't even touch it. I mean, at his prime as a cover corner, there's a reason he used primetime. I mean, he was so good. And then he put so much fear into the quarterbacks by just being on the field that if he gets a tip ball, it's gone. Like, it's done. And I'm not throwing pick sixes. And so that has to take into account. I think Deion's a top 5 player of all time. He's certainly easy to move below an Aaron Donald eventually. And for people like me, in as far as my list goes, but I think for right now, I would keep him above Ray. They're both in that lore kind of category. Ray's obviously got way better stats, but I think Deion, importance to the NFL, importance to the position. Guys wanted to play corner in the modern NFL because of Deion Sanders, and he changed that position. You see the Diggses and the people, the modern NFL corners have the flash, the flair, and they're getting paid now because of Deion Sanders.
Yeah, I mean, his impact on the game can't be understated. He made a lasting impression on the league and on the position. He was the toughest one for me to deal with in this entire list because I just didn't know where I truly felt about putting him. Like, it's just like I could see him in so many different spots.
Yeah.
And I ultimately settled on him not being in the top 10, and that was really tough. That was really tough. I think what boiled it down for me was the other 2 DBs on this list in Ronnie Lott and Rod Woodson.
They're better stats.
And it surprised me too that, like, Deion, also another guy that the pick 6, Rod Woodson had more touchdowns than Deion. It's like,
yes,
and that's crazy to me. And Deion wasn't, I know it gets overstated in terms of his lack of, tackling, but like, he was really just I'm going to cover and that's what I'm going to do. And he did it amazing. He's probably the best cover corner of all time. And so it's really hard to leave the best at something off of a top 10 list.
Yeah.
I just, in the totality of it, if I'm looking at these are just 10 players I think I'd rather have on my defense than Deion. Like, that's the only way I can put it.
Interesting. Okay.
And so, despite the positional flexibility that I really wanted to have, like, a guy of his mold in here, I just couldn't. When it all shook out, I didn't have him in here. So
Deion
there's
is
a great
my
case to be
Joe
made
Green on that list. I think there's a lore thing. I think there's just if you're telling me I get to have 10 defensive players all the time, I would instantly go Deion as cornerback number 1, CB number 1. And you're right. Yeah. And I think a part of that is just what he did. The highlight reels are so high, and he did it with such a flair that and a energy, and his covering ability is just so unique. To me, that's what put it over the top. And again, you look at the stats, you say, how can you have him over certain other Peter zone positions? I again go back to it's the same. It's a little bit of like his lore, I think, prevented guys from throwing his way. You know what I mean? It's hard statistics. Sure. Stats for corners are tough. They're really tough. And like safeties and free safeties, because again, they don't have the opportunity to touch the ball. Like Peanut Charles Tillman, the peanut punch and the turnovers and the interceptions, like that's a dude that, like, you can make the case should be in the Hall of Fame.
Oh yeah.
But like, again, it's just hard to judge like those stats. Like, it's easy. Running backs, carries, yards after carry, you know what I mean? Touchdowns, things like that, receptions. But it's hard when you don't guarantee ever get a chance to touch the ball. So it's a little subjective for sure. Defense is way more subjective.
Yeah. It's about watching them. Now, I will say, if we ever do end up doing a top 10 human highlight reels, Deion will certainly be on that list.
He'd be number 2. I'll tell you already. He's number 2 on my list on that, okay. On that list.
Very good. Number 3, we'll go right to that with Ray Lewis coming in on the CBS list. And that's where Ray Lewis comes in for me as well.
Yeah.
I did this because of his relentless motor. I mean, if you want to talk about a guy that just never seemed to get tired, that was Ray Lewis, and a guy that engineered one of the most dominant defenses ever in the 2000 Ravens. Single-handedly was a major reason for that championship team. And you did mention the signature moment. And while I'll agree with you, I can't think of many. I can think of one big-time signature moment from him in the playoffs, and that was the year after the Tennessee Titans lost in the Super Bowl, and they were making that run again. And Eddie George tells the story of him catching the pass out in the flat,
Eddie George
and Ray Lewis running up and ripping the ball right out of his hands and taking it the other way. That to me was a signature one because they came at such a pivotal moment in the postseason. But I digress. Two-time Defensive Player of the Year, and also a guy who was a lot more versatile than I think he gets credit for. 31 picks in his career, 20 forced fumbles, 2,059 tackles is the most all time.
Yeah.
He averaged 120 per year over a 17-season NFL career. His impact in terms of playing the middle linebacker position so well, his vision, he had the vision of like a Mike Singletary.
Yeah.
Only except for with the just an incredible athleticism that was really unrivaled because he's just a massive dude that could run so fast and really could penetrate the backfield as well as he could go out in space and cover. I just think the dominance that he displayed year over year, and as we've talked about, being a member of dominant defenses and being the face of said dominant defense, I think, puts you in kind of a different class, especially, when he had the likes of Ed Reed and, Haloti Ngata and some of these other, really, really amazing players. Ray Lewis is still the guy that sticks out. And, the 7 first team all pros. I mean, you could list the accolades all day, but it's really what he did on the field for so long and how he impacted the game and how he engineered that defense. I mean, like you said, middle linebacker is the position where you are in control of that unit. Few ever, if any, engineered the calls on the field as well as Ray Lewis. And so that's what puts him there at number 3. But I will say, in terms of like Aaron Donald's moving up this list or other people potentially moving up this list, Ray is probably the first guy to get knocked down to make room. That's what I would say about that.
Yeah, no. Listen, my thing with Ray, and like I said, I think it's my biggest.
And that pains me to say as a Steelers fan, by the way.
It pains me a little bit too, in the sense that I just think that Ray's lore is built. I mean, his stats, he does have incredible. His stats are incredible. But again, I just go back to that, and I think it's a little bit as a Bears fan, I'm also trying to build up Brian Urlacher. I just think there's moments where it's like, if there's someone in your era who's literally right there, like step for step for you almost, you know what I mean? And I think in ways was a better cover guy, you know what I mean? Longer, side to side, maybe not as big of a hitter as Ray was in that way, but Ray deserves credit. I think Ray's ability to stay healthy for as long as he did and transition a little bit with the game, how it transitioned from the mid 90s to the, 2012, 2013 era where, by the time he retired, guys were throwing the ball 60 times a game. He does a lot of credit. I think Ray is, like I said, he's a top 5 for me. So I don't think it's that big of a slight, but I agree. Donald is a guy that would move Ray. And so, I don't hate it.
I think it's similar though, what you're saying there, to the Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, dynamic then with Ray and Brian.
Agree.
Whereas and so it's
Ray got the 2 Super Bowls.
You wouldn't argue at this point though that Tom, even if he had half the Super Bowls he does, if he had the same number of Super Bowls as Peyton, we'd probably still at this point acknowledge that Tom is better, right?
The longevity.
And the longevity is a big part of that, and the leadership. I do think. I mean, I'm right there with you in terms of, I think as time will go on, unfortunately, Brian Urlacher is probably going to be more and more underrated as the years go on. Absolute legend. Like I think Brian isn't that far away on this list, to be honest with you. Like,
Brian
he's in the top 25. Probably.
Well, and that's why I'm glad he was a first ballot guy, because him and Ray went in the same year, and he is 9th all time in tackles. Brian.
I didn't realize that. That's crazy.
Brian retired with a lot. I think at least 2 years left in the tank of productive years. Maybe not Pro Bowl years, but productive years. And I mean,
Well, it's like he tore his ACL or something in the final game of this one of the seasons, right? 2014 maybe.
Well, you're trying in 2012, and it was at the end of that Lovie Smith. He did not. the Mark Trestman, he was done. He's like, listen, I can't. I just can't do this. I'm not switching all this, and he didn't want to play for another team. The Bears made a bad move. They should have resigned him. He had those Mel Tucker defenses that were terrible. That they should have. Brian could have helped dearly, but he was a little injured. He wouldn't need to be signed. So they just thought, I'm going to hang it up. But Brian, just say this: 2 more years of Brian playing at even 60% of Brian's peak, he would have gotten another 100 tackles, which would have put him 4th all time.
Yeah, so that's pretty crazy. That's wild.
And that's what I'm saying. Ray had those 4 years of 96 to 2000 when Brian was in college. And he was older. And so Ray gets that credit for playing. I mean, it would have been like Brian playing to 2016. And I think, and Brian's health didn't last there at the very end because he was more of a range guy, used his speed. But again, that's why it's so hard for me, because it's like there were chunks of Ray's career where Brian was the better football player. But Ray got that Super Bowl before Brian even entered the league, or it's his rookie year. And then Ray, and then Ray gets the other one to cap off his career to walk off. And he was instrumental in both. He was. And so he does get that nod in the way that Brady gets the nod ahead of Peyton, where he was instrumental in winning more. But I think culture is a part of it. I mean, the Bears are a bad organization. And I think a little bit Brian with Peyton, I think it's a fair comparison. Their careers kind of match up and all that stuff, and is that Brian, I hope doesn't get lost. And that's why it's great that he was a first ballot guy, because he deserves that treatment.
Definitely.
And I do think if you talk about it, like, people had Junior Seau, like, oh, Junior Seau should be ahead of Brian. I was doing a lot of research on lists and stuff. Seau's another guy that played from 90, he played 19 years. So if you're going some longevity, I mean, certainly, but stats-wise, Brian's stats match up in the short time Brian played, like, you know what I mean, compared to Junior Seau. It's just tough. I think that's why I struggle with Ray Lewis, is because of being a Bears fan and watching their careers go head-to-head. They are who they thought they were, and Brian Urlacher winning that game for him, like, that is the best defensive performance I think you could arguably put up in one single game. The 19 tackles, what he did in the second half against the Arizona Cardinals in that season, where he literally leads them to a Super Bowl with how good that defense was in 2006. To me, that's like, that guy is, I get it. Like, that's not alone enough to put him in the top 10 of all time. And Brian's just outside my top 10, but that's where it's like, that signature moment. Talk about watching a game and taking over a game and being as elite as you were. I know it's a Brian Urlacher love fest, but
did Brian, real quick, did Brian get a pick six in that Saints game in the postseason?
Yeah,
because I remember because Reggie Bush waved goodbye to them earlier in the game, and then I think I remember Urlacher then doing something similar at the end to ice it. Yeah.
And Urlacher has 2 bad highlights. One, Tom Brady juked him, and one, the bus ran him over at the short goal line. But again, I have to make the Urlacher case to justify my not having Ray Lewis third. That's it. That's all.
Fair enough.
That's the pretzel my mind is in. Okay. All right. Number 3 for me, Dick Buckus. So to me, Dick Buckus deserves to be this high because, again, you have to honor the history of the game, and Dick Butkus is a guy that you can't even talk about stats beyond the fact that in 8 seasons he was an 8-time All-Pro. I mean, like, an 8-time Pro Bowler, 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. He played with a physicality that would be you'd get arrested if you played in today's NFL. There is and I'll end with this. It's simple. There is a reason the best high school linebacker in the country, the best college linebacker in the country, and the best NFL linebacker in the NFL every year win the Dick Butkus Award. It's simple as that. I mean, Dick Butkus defined what the linebacker position would be from the day he entered the NFL until what it still is considered today of what it means to be a middle linebacker in the NFL. And I get it. The NFL is changing, and middle linebackers now, you want guys that are built more like a Danny Trevathan, who are a little bit smaller. You know what I mean? Guys, depending on the way your defense
that
runs,
can move.
who are like basically free safeties on steroids. You know what I mean? You want more of that. So Dick Buckus, the era thing wouldn't, but Dick Buckus is, to me, when I build my all-time NFL team, he's my middle linebacker. I don't care about Ray Lewis, and that's it. He's my middle linebacker. Ray's probably an outside linebacker on that team, along with a guy that is coming up for number 2 on me. I think you can guess who that would be. But like that's Dick Buckus. And I think if you broke it down to historians, I think of the game, the Bill Belichick's, everything, I think they would agree. I think Dick Buckus deserves that. And he's a great Twitter follow now. So there's that to it. And I think there has to be, you know what I mean? That little bit of representation of the history of the game in the top 3. Dick Buckus is one of those guys who'll never move top 3. You know what I mean? Well, Aaron Donald, but he, like, you know what I mean? Like, kind of like the history of the game where, like, you got to have one of those guys. He'll never move top 5. He'll never leave my top 5.
He's a Mount Rushmore dude.
Yeah, he's a Mount Rushmore defensive player in that way. And so I think he's the best of the best from that generation that is way bygone, but he deserves to be in that spot in that way.
It's pretty cool that he's still involved, and he recently just got a Twitter that's hilarious. I think we talked about that not too long ago. It's just cool that he's still, he's such a legend, and yet he's still very much a part of the media landscape, and still getting to hear from him and stuff. So that is really cool. And I apologize for putting him at number 7.
No, you're okay.
Like,
all right.
I feel like that could have cut deep, but no, he is an absolute legend, dominant guy for sure. All right. So 2 and 1 for CBS was 2, Lawrence Taylor, 1, Reggie White.
Before you do it.
Yeah.
Do you, that's mine. Spoiler alert.
It is not mine. I have them flipped, actually.
Oh, you do? All right. So let's go that route then. Why do you have LT number 1?
I have LT number 1 because he created the outside pass rush as we know it. I mean, in terms of what we have today as an edge rusher, that was created by Lawrence Taylor. I mean, he was that guy to stand up and rush the passer from that edge. But it wasn't just that; it was how amazing he was at it. And honestly, I'm gonna say the biggest NFL historian that I am aware of is Bill Belichick. And
yes.
Bill Belichick swears hand and foot that it's Lawrence Taylor is the greatest player in NFL history, not just defensive player.
He coached him.
And he coached him. He did coach him. And I get that. But he also was in a league and a conference where he witnessed Reggie White firsthand as well.
True.
And look, in terms of their dominance as among their contemporaries, they're very similar. They each had 8 first-team All-Pros. Lawrence Taylor had 6 in his first 6 seasons. Now, Reggie White has a few more Pro Bowls than he does. But then also Lawrence Taylor has 3 Defensive Player of the Years as opposed to Reggie White's 2. I mean, when it comes to 1 and 2, we're splitting hairs.
We are.
They both played very long. Lawrence Taylor has fewer sacks than Reggie White. I'll give him that. But he's one of only 2 defensive players ever to win a league MVP. And that's something in and of itself, too.
It's
1986 to be the MVP of the entire league. I mean,
who was the other
we can't
one?
even gather. Alan Page, actually, 1971.
That's a good trivia question.
Yeah, that is a good trivia question, actually. So yeah, Lawrence Taylor, just an absolute wreaked havoc, was a maniac on the field, and was so good. And to me too, I think it was more, he had to be a little bit more tactful and skillful in how he achieved his status, because Reggie White was pure power. and strength. Whereas Lawrence Taylor was all that, but he had to play with, and I don't want to diminish Reggie White here by saying this. The intelligence he had to play with on the field in terms of reading plays and reading offensive line schemes was just kind of next level. And Reggie White could use his sheer amazing
Size.
power to just barrel through everyone. That's why I give the edge to Lawrence Taylor. You can absolutely make the case it's the other way around. I am not going to argue with anybody about that, but I will. I think the extra DPOY, the MVP of the league, and then the comparable first team accolades is just kind of what puts him there for me, and creating a position essentially as the edge defender.
So this obviously was something I spent a lot of time on. And to be honest with you, Dan, I simply came down to the fact that I left it Reggie White, Lawrence Taylor 1-2, knowing that they will always be on the Mount Rushmore. They will both they're
probably on the Mount Rushmore of the NFL period, not just defensive players too, right? I mean, that'd be tighter, obviously. I mean, you got to put Tom there, but it could be,
that's one
Peyton,
of those. That's one of those where that'd be a good argument. That'd be a really good argument. I think maybe we can look into that. Because if you're talking about just the Mount Rushmore of the NFL as a whole,
George Halas is up
coaches, there. Everything. I mean, they both are on the short list. They really are. I think for me, it came down to Reggie White was able to extend his career and be really, really effective at a time when Lawrence Taylor had already retired. They both, because remember, they came into the league. Reggie White was drafted round 1, pick 4 in 84, and Taylor was drafted in 81. Now, Taylor, he ended in 93. Reggie played all the way to 2000 with the Panthers. So he was able to play. I mean, Reggie White made all decades, 80s and 90s. I mean, Reggie, I give him that slight edge because he Bruce Smith the end of his career and was able to still be really effective for those Packers teams. I mean, Reggie White, when you think of his absolute dominance, it's Philly. And then you move on to the Packers years where it's like, oh, no, wait. He was also absolutely dominant as the defensive piece for a Packers team who went to 2 Super Bowls with Brett Favre. So I hate him because as a Packers, he's a Packers legend as much as he's a Eagles legend. And it's weird, right? Because you think of the all-time legends, you think a lot of those guys, they have one team. Like Peyton, he's a Colt and had really some good success at the very end of his career with the Broncos. Tom is a Patriot who had some really good success at the end of his career with the Buccaneers. Reggie White, I mean, you really have to argue, is he an Eagle or is he a Packer? Like, he was so
true.
good.
That's a good point.
He was really so good with both. 5 years with the Packers. He spent 7 seasons with the Eagles.
Charles Woodson maybe, a similar.
Woodson's and he's a guy that just missed my list. So I gave, again, it's splitting hairs. I gave the longevity to Reggie, and I do think that Reggie, he's got a little bit of the Walter Payton. You died suddenly. I think there's something. It's not making him a better player, but there's a lore, and
Sealed his legend.
And Lawrence Taylor is such a scumbag off the field too. It's hard. It is hard to try to put all that out. But I think strictly playing.
And career, he had 56 more sacks than Lawrence Taylor.
He did.
That's a lot.
I do think LT is a great example of a physical freak, but Reggie White is the definition of like that dude built different, like legitimately built different. So splitting hairs, I'm not gonna. It doesn't bother me either way. If you go 1-2, 1-2, I'll give it to Reggie though.
He had 3 picks in his career too. I didn't realize that when I looked it up. I was like, oh, the guy who was literally pushing piles still came down with 3 picks in his career. Not too shabby there, Reggie White. Yeah, no, it's hard to argue that his longevity was well noted, dominated, 13 Pro Bowls. That's really hard to do. So really good guy, really good player. They both are. Yeah, so that's our list. That was
Pretty
a lot
fun.
of fun. That was a really tough one to
It
go
was.
through.
I think yeah, I'll give you a couple names that had just missed mine, and I'll let you kind of simmer on it.
For sure.
So Bruce Smith and Mean Joe were right on the outside. Ed Reed, Charles Woodson, Mike Singletary, and then Urlacher and Nitschke. The other linebackers, I think that Lambert too would have been the next linebacker as well that I would have had to really munch. If we were gonna go top 20, I think all those guys would have made my top 20.
Yeah. I have a couple overlaps there. Obviously, Deion's my number 11. He's just right outside it. And then I have J.J. Watt, Bob Lilly. I think he kind of gets thrown under the radar too, just like those dominant Cowboys teams, and really was one of the first like defensive tackles that you couldn't block. Really old school, but he was a force. Dick Night Train Lane, like another guy that I just like can't help but think about when I think of the history of the NFL.
Night Train.
And a guy who played linebacker and corner, like he kind of just did it all. And he had 68 interceptions in his career, a massive human for being a corner.
He's always like that great. He's the defensive example to me of like Gale Sayers. I would love to see if you could just take them right now and like the 20-year-old version of those two guys and bring them to 2022, spend a year of like athletic training with like the best of the best nutritionists. Those guys, I mean, their potential to explode would just been, ungodly.
Yeah, no question. An incredible talent, to say the least. And then Ed Reed rounded out the 15 for me. So, it's tough to leave some of those guys off, but I'm happy with the list. Happy how it turned out.
Yeah.
And so, that was a lot of fun. We didn't have too many disagreements with CBS overall. More so placement than anything else.
It's tough. You got to
player here and there.
You got to find ways to manage. I think when you're doing lists like this, and as a fan, if you're out there listening, if you still made it to this point in the podcast, God bless you. But you have to find ways like, what do you prioritize more? For me, I think when you look at it, like linebackers are the most important defensive players. So they lean a little bit more of importance to me. And then defensive linemen, I think over corners and safeties, it's a little bit easier to find their dominance. But I think in some ways the corners, the safeties are more important if they're really good. The Deions, the Ronnie Lotts, the Woodsons, you know what I mean? So it's kind of it's judging that. It certainly is judging that. I don't think after going through what we just did an hour of this, we missed anyone that it's like, no, they are a top 10 player. I don't think we did.
It's a lot debatable.
Yeah,
for sure. But I would agree with that. I think we touched on, the nuts and bolts of what it means to be an all-time defensive great player in this league. So really happy with it. Hope you all enjoyed that as well. If you have some disagreements with us, please let us know. Absolutely. We'd love to hear any feedback on that front. And we'll see as we get closer and closer to the regular season. We may have another one of these in in the works. So top 10 lists are always fun, and they change as well. So
I certainly think we set ourselves up there for the idea of who are the top 10 like NFL legend, just NFL people.
Yeah, like a lore or something like
because
that.
I think there's a lot of there's a lot of, you have players, coaches, owners. I think there's, commissioners. I think that could be a lot of fun for us visualizing who are the top 10 just people when you think of NFL
influences on the league. Yeah.
Influence, like story, like how do you tell the story of the league? I think that's the best way to judge it. Telling the story of the league, the top 10 people that are most important to telling the story, because you
that
have
would be a fun one.
I mean, story's hard because then you think, if I'm just telling the history, then it's like I need, and number one you have to have a top 10 of people all from the 30s and 40s. No, but just the top 10 NFL people. Maybe the way we judge it is like, because it's got to be maybe a little more personal. We'll try to figure this off air, but it's a fun idea of trying to think about, because I don't like the idea of Mount Rushmore. That's It's an overdone
There's too
thing.
few slots available in Mount
It's
Rushmore.
not our. It's not our. It's not our bit. Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, that was fun. We'll have more coming up. Maybe we'll have some Baker news. Maybe we won't. Who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, until next time, stay safe, everyone.